so much for taking the time. I've been following the Undistancing project for the last 3-4 months that Vaibhav has been running it, and I think it's been very fascinating to see all the organic interest that it's coming from leaders willing to share, and then also the interest coming from people just ready for the learning and the coaching and everything else as well. So from my side, I think I've been fortunate to kind of be at both Grab and Uber when both companies were going through and are still going through hypergrowth. So I had a lot of learnings both at Uber and at Grab across 3 countries where I learned some of the hyper growth scaling practices that were happening, and also both mistakes and positives that kind of came out of it as well. And I tied this back into this term called Blitzscaling, which was coined by Reid Hoffman from LinkedIn, which I'll go through a little bit later. But it's been very interesting as I've been able to kind of take some of these learnings from this book and his podcast and see it applied to what we've been doing at both Grab and Uber for the last 6 years. So quickly going through this, right? So guys, it's meant to be fully interactive. And I think any point you have any questions, Chinchi and Vaibhav will pause and ask for the questions. Just feel free to do that. And it's meant to be more interactive and casual. And we'll save a lot of time at the end for asking questions and kind of go through the details as well. But just quickly going through this, I'll give a quick intro about myself, what my background is, walk you through what Blitzscaling is and why I've found it so relevant at both Uber and Grab, and also some of the companies, hypergrowth tech companies that we've seen over the last 2 decades as well. And then some of the learnings that came out of Blitzscaling were around the importance of hiring and picking the right team, kind of the product market fit, making sure your unit economics are actually very solid before scaling, and then also investing in bets going forward as well. So quickly going into my background, right? So just a little bit about myself. I was born in Hyderabad, India. Spent about 8 years in India and then moved to the US at an early stage to the East Coast, and spent the next almost 15 to 16 years in the US. So I did my engineering at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Liked math and science, thought I wanted to be an engineer. I did mechanical engineering, but immediately after that decided I didn't want to do mechanical engineering, so tried consulting for a few years. And I think the reason consulting was very helpful for me early on in my career was I was on the tech strategy side at PwC. So I was able to pick up some of the basics of data analytics, database modeling, and also how to work with different clients along their warehouses and so on. So that gave me the opportunity to join in as a data analyst at Uber, where I spent about 4 years at Uber across both the US, India, and Singapore. I'll kind of walk through those experiences a little bit later on. And then once the Grab merger happened in 2018, moved over to Grab and spent the last 2.5 years at Grab. And I just actually left Grab about 2 weeks ago to start my own business. I'll quickly talk about that at the end of the presentation as well. And just hobbies and background about myself. I love watching and playing sports. I do a lot of reading, traveling, pre-COVID, hiking as well. And then I'm very, very obsessed with food, both in terms of just going to restaurants. I don't cook, but I do love food tech, everything about food tech, from food delivery to cloud kitchens to supply chain management to creating new brands, the whole spectrum. I've been fortunate to kind of get that experience for the last 4 years, and something that I want to continue moving forward and learning from as well. And I also do a bit of investing. I think, like a lot of people over the last 6 months, been reading a lot about investments, studying Bitcoin and getting into Bitcoin a bit as well, with some of my other friends here as well. But that's quickly about myself and quick background. And going into the main kind of project for what we're discussing right now is Blitzscaling, right? So I first came across this term 3 years ago when I was reading the book by Reid Hoffman. And Reid Hoffman, founder and CEO of LinkedIn, he also has a podcast that I highly recommend called Masters of Scale, where he essentially interviews CEOs and business leaders of super fast growth companies, everything from Eric Schmidt, Brian Chesky, I think Dara was on there recently as well. And they kind of go through their learnings and experiences as they've taken this business to massive scale, right? So in the book, what I found was interesting, and it was so relevant for what I was kind of going through at Uber and Grab, is Reed is very open and transparent, and in some situations controversial in how he describes things as well. So in this situation, when he explains what blitzscaling is, it's essentially growing at a rate that's so much faster than your competitors that it makes you feel uncomfortable, right? So you're essentially prioritizing speed and winning market share and category position over efficiency in the face of uncertainty, right? And the reason kind of the companies that we've seen in the past do this and expand so aggressively, right? Like everything from Amazon, Uber, and Grab is it's a highly competitive marketplace, both on the ride sharing, food delivery, on the e-commerce side as well. And sometimes it is necessary to scale as aggressively as possible. So you start learning things about the business and about your customers once you reach a certain scale that you can't learn when you're smaller and optimizing for the small space as well. So the scale actually brings up a lot of interesting problem statements and learnings that you can actually use to build out this model over time as well. And it's also the reason that he kind of compares between startups, what makes a blitzscaling startup and a large organization that's not able to keep up with this, right? When you're a very large organization, and if your culture is not meant to invest in new bets and scale as quickly, you're not able to keep up with the startups that come in, raise a lot of money, and are able to go after a really strong problem and target area. And I think that's why you're also starting to see a lot of disruption over the last 20 years in a lot of areas, everything from e-commerce, food delivery, ride sharing, because these models have taken up speed. And the companies that are able to kind of evolve and do this, in my view, some of the best companies that do this is Jeff Bezos at Amazon, where he's built the culture to have every single business that's within Amazon blitzscale and reach massive scale across the countries and across that business line as well. And quickly, just to kind of walk through how he defines it, I actually like this structure and frame of mind, and I find it very helpful when I think about new business problems, both when I was at Grab or Uber, also right now in my startup, is when you go after a business, not all businesses are meant to be blitzscaled. I think we've also seen companies that are blitzscaled that have not succeeded because of that. I'll kind of walk through why that is from my opinion as well. So one of the things that's very important is to make sure that the market size is very large, right? So when you're investing that capital, you need to make sure that it's not for a specific country, specific demographic, or it's a very niche customer segment that you're going after, where you might be spending a lot of money trying to attract a lot of customers, but they not be the actual fit for this, right? So the market size is actually very important, something that as you start thinking about this business and building this and investing your time and energy into it, actually doing that research to make sure that it actually makes sense, right? And I think one example here is with like ride sharing and Uber and what Grab did, right? The market size in the taxi and transportation market was just massive, and it was ripe for disruption. So the opportunity to kind of invest and scale that was very apparent and necessary to kind of do. And that's why the companies have reached kind of the scale that they have at this point. The second piece is about distribution. I think one of the key things that as you start understanding if you have a product market fit and how do you actually scale and get to the next level that you need are network effects and existing networks that you can rely on. One of my favorite examples here, and I think a company that does this really well, is Netflix. So Netflix didn't stop at just creating a web app or an iPhone app or an iPad app or an Android app. They've actually completely figured out their distribution network, where they've essentially launched free apps on your Samsung TVs, your LG TVs, and created that entire ecosystem for you to just directly find Netflix on your TV remote. And what this essentially does is it makes it a staple into whenever you think about TV and you sit down on your couch, it's there, right? And I think this is a really good example of how partnerships and the network effects of the distribution are super important to let it happen as well. And then three, if you have a business model like either Facebook or Google or AWS with very high gross margins, 60 to 70%, you can actually use this to finance your growth and hyperscale, right? At this point, actually, when you have high gross margins, most companies do invest a lot in scaling, either through an enterprise sales team or the infrastructure on their engineers to do this as well. But I think it's also important to make sure that a business that doesn't have a high gross margins, there is a path to profitability, and when you can get there and what you can do to achieve higher gross margins. And 4 is network effects. I think the best example here is probably like social media, or even how Uber and Grab early on were able to bring on new customers through referrals. So once you started using it, you start bringing a virality loop where you refer a friend for them to start using it as well. And the habit kind of builds through over time to start using the platform as well. And ride sharing specifically is the pure definition of network effects, right? The more drivers you have, the better the experience, the better the reliability, and the more the price comes down, and the more customers that you can have join in as well onto this. And as that grows and grows, it's harder to kind of compete against that unless you have capital to do that as well. And so I think so there's a meme that actually came out of this after a while, where blitzscaling actually became very popular. There was a meme that said that was about blitz failing as well. So there's a few companies that have scaled extremely aggressively. They raised a lot of capital, and before they actually figured out their unit economics or their gross margins or to see if that market size was even big, they burnt all that money, right? So it's very important to make sure that there's actually a clear product market fit. And you should be able to do that in your MVP phase or your seed or Series A stage, where you're actually starting to see that your customers love the product, they're able to pay for it. You can subsidize over time to scale faster and get more customers and build that network effects. But that initial customer love or that magical experience needs to exist. If it doesn't, when you actually start asking customers to pay, they might not pay. And then the last one is on the operational scalability as well. Sometimes as you scale, your costs scale at a faster rate than what your revenues that you're getting in are. And this could happen for a multitude of reasons. You could be an asset heavy business where if your sales or your customers drop for any reason, your overhead costs actually start bringing down your entire margins pretty drastically as well, right? So the figuring out ways to de-risk yourself from that operational issues is actually very important. And something that I kind of went through at Kitchens, also building a cloud kitchen business, which is asset heavy. How do you actually scale it without it having a large impact on your overheads and costs as well? Any questions on this before I move on? I can stop for a bit to kind of answer these this framework.
There are 3 questions. Sai.
Sure.
Maybe I'll take one. So there are 3 questions. You can tell which ones you will be covering later. The first one is by Ryan. It is, I think, related to your blitz fail attempt, maybe. So what in your view caused WeWork to maybe not succeed so much in the Blitzscale attempt? Is this something you'd like to cover now, or?
Yeah, I can do that right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think Blitzscale, WeWork is an example of that. Thanks for asking that, Ryan. Where it's a heavy asset heavy business. So you're essentially leasing out the office space for a longer period of time and renting it at scale from a lot of different commercial real estate. So when you're able to kind of subsidize and you're able to continue raising billions and bring in tenants, then it makes sense, right? It might look like you're actually growing in terms of the customers that you're doing, but your overall margins, at this point, you've actually never known if that business model works at scale. And that's kind of some of the risks with blitzscaling before knowing if you have sound unit economics, because if you immediately scale without proving out your monetization model or making sure that your business model makes sense, it becomes difficult. And I think with WeWork specifically, it was such a high cash burn business that once the investments kind of slowed down, right, you had to go from 500 million, billion, 4 billion, 16 billion, and you had to continue raising it to hit those growth rates to justify the kind of the valuations that WeWork was getting. So when the funding stopped, it actually exposed the lower unit economics for the business. And I think WeWork could actually work, but it's one of those businesses. I think it makes sense when it's you get it right and you scale very efficiently in that situation, because it is asset heavy. You pick on overheads every time you build a new business. So I think it's one of those things, unless you have that really sound or you have a tech play around it, which gives you higher margins. It's one of those things that I think was probably scaled too fast.
Thank you, Sai. I guess we'll take another question. This one is from Piyush. He's asking why Indian-based startups don't able to scale up globally, except few names like Oyo and Ola that only 2 to 3 market based beside India. At the same time, Airbnb and Uber are global.
Yeah, I think there's I mean, I guess this is my opinion, right? Because I did work at Uber, and one of the advantages that Silicon Valley companies have is they're able to raise a lot more funds, and and that's a byproduct of a lot of VC firms being in Silicon Valley and around that area. And you're also, the big difference between the US and India at the moment is your average price, or your average basket size, your average ride cost is tends to be a lot more. So you're able to raise that capital and then use that capital and those profits to come in and battle it out in India as well. India historically has been, I mean, even for us at Uber and for Ola, the price of a ride tends to be like 10-20% of what it is in the US or Australia, right? So the margins and the capital that you have to invest in growth tends to be harder, and for you to fight in the other countries as well. But having said that, I think there's been a lot of great startups that are coming out of India right now that are scaling globally. I think Baiju is one of them. There's a lot of enterprise software technology companies that are coming out as well. And SaaS companies tend to have the higher gross margins. They tend to have the network effects. Once you sign on a large business, everyone starts using it within that business, and then you need sales to grow this as well. So I think in anywhere where you're able to kind of scale and your cost base is not as much of an impact, or your competitive disadvantage is based on how much you can raise, I think we're seeing a lot of success from Indian startups in those areas.
Thank you, Sai. And I think we'll just leave the rest of the question to the next round of Q&A.
Okay, sounds good. So I think quickly, I just wanted to spend a slide on talking through what blitzscaling was like at Uber and Grab holistically, as what I've kind of seen it. I think just referencing some of the terms from the previous slide, I think it was a global product market fit from day one. One of the examples that Travis always likes to refer to was the price of what a taxi medallion was in the US, in New York, before Uber kind of came in. Each medallion for a taxi was essentially going for $1 million, right? Essentially, it was limited supply. There were 60,000 taxi cabs 50 years ago, and there are 60,000 taxi cabs right now before Uber. So it made it so the demand kept increasing, but the supply didn't, right? So so the taxi cabs, there wasn't enough supply. The reliability wasn't that great. The quality and safety wasn't that great also, because I mean, there's just no competition, right? So when Uber kind of came in, it was able to disrupt a lot of these things and scale very quickly. One, there's a lot of funding that was raised, but from a customer perspective, it was magical from day one, and it solved a core problem where you can get a ride anywhere you wanted, right? And I think the cool things that you start noticing globally now, right, with ride sharing is the number of people getting their licenses have decreased when you turn 16 or 18. People are starting to live further away from metro stations or in the suburbs, because you're able to get an Uber or Grab compared to before, when you weren't able to get a taxi in that area. Right. So I think the product market fit and that experience was there from day one. And I think the other key improvement and the reason that Uber was able to kind of do this was the team that Uber hired and the team that Grab hired were very entrepreneurial and felt like CEOs of their own city, right? So I think when you look at the example of Lyft and Uber, Lyft focused predominantly in the US and it has a large business in the US, but Uber was able to kind of hire very strong, hungry entrepreneurs to go into each city globally and kind of launch that playbook very quickly as well. So I think it was one of those things that differentiated and the mindset of the culture to do that as well. And that team, in my perspective, was a very, very key differentiator in the position that both Uber and Grab are, and the way that you're able to kind of tackle either new geographies or new business lines like Uber Eats, Grab Food, or Grab Pay, because of the strong team and the right mindset that you're able to kind of hire as well. Number two, I think fundraising and capital allocation. As we know, I think both companies raised a lot of money to do this, and it was necessary from a perspective of not only getting category position, expanding into getting as many customers as possible, because something like ride sharing and food delivery takes time to build a habit, right? It's not one of those things where even if the experience is magical, you won't give up your car after 10 Uber rides, right? It's something that you have to take 50, 100 times and you start understanding that the benefits of this, right? And so for that to happen, you need to invest in getting customers and subsidizing until a point where you can you don't need to as much anymore, right? One of the things that we used to see back in kind of 2014 at Uber was whenever you did a price cut and you reduce the price, you'd see a step function growth in terms of the customers that were coming in every single time that you did this, right? So this was kind of the impetus to launch UberX, Uber Pool, and all these things where once you start getting closer and closer to owning the cost of owning a car, once you add in like insurance, maintenance, fuel, and parking, it made more and more sense for people to kind of shift to that as well. And I think the chart on the right is actually very interesting because it kind of shows you the curves of what different business lines are. So even a business line as magical as ride sharing, after a certain time, the growth starts decreasing, right? It stops going from 100-200% growth to close to 10 or 15%. And if you're a company and one of the main goals is to add value to your shareholders and continue growing and investing in R&D, you need to keep getting into new business lines, right? And that's why both Uber and Grab got into kind of food delivery, grocery delivery, trucking. Uber does trucking, Grab does payments, to kind of facilitate additional growth as well over time. And the interesting part of this is as you launch newer and newer business lines, you don't start off at the same part in the y-axis because you have an existing customer base, you have the existing infrastructure, so you actually start hitting those network effects much faster, and you start up higher and higher with each service that you launch, right? And you have this competitive advantage to other companies that are just single-handedly focused on specific areas because you're essentially a marketplace of multiple business lines. You're providing value to all your customers in one single location and making them the switching costs higher, right? I think my favorite company that's been doing this for the longest time is definitely Amazon and what Bezos has been able to do, where it doesn't matter what industry you're in. Amazon and Amazon Prime, essentially, customers just love it so much, and it's one of the most loved brands in the US and globally now, that they're able to sign up for other services because you can get Alexa for very cheap. You can start getting Prime Video for very subsidized prices, Amazon Twitch, you can get Amazon Music, all these things for under the same Prime subscription, which has allowed Amazon to have, I think, 51% of the US households signing up for Amazon Prime, right? Which is just a ridiculous fact. So I think the fact when you do this blitzscaling and you invest in new business lines that hit those criteria that I kind of talked about previously, with these market size distribution margins and network effects, you're able to kind of invest in newer business lines, and each business line that you invest in actually has a faster path to growth and success than the previous one as well. But at the same time, I think I don't like there's been a lot of blitz fails as well. Both I think at all three companies and all major tech companies this happens, because I think one is like the Amazon Fire Phone, right? You have to invest in these bets to see if it'll work or not. But sometimes you'll get a $500 billion business like what AWS is by kind of investing in those things. And then quickly talking about my experience at Uber and Grab. I just to walk through these two companies, right? So I started at Uber as a data analyst in late 2014 in San Francisco. And very quickly, I was kind of fortunate to be given the opportunity to move to India. I actually moved from San Francisco to Gurgaon, and in 2015 to set up the analytics and strategy team. And I got a lot of mentorship from Amit, who was the Uber India CEO, and was his chief of staff for 2 years there, where I was able to wear a lot of different hats, right? Everything from operations to analytics strategy. I was managing fraud there. And I think if you guys ever want to know funny stories about fraud in the early days, we can catch up after, but there's a lot of crazy stories on the level of fraud that was going on earlier on. And that I think gave me the opportunity to kind of understand what is it that I like to do and what is it that I was passionate about and where do I want to go. And it's something that I'd recommend to a lot of the younger listeners on the call is kind of putting yourself in a position to take on a lot of responsibilities, even if you don't know what you want to do, because I think that allows you to experiment and see what you like. And for me, in 2017, I moved from Delhi to Singapore, just as when Uber Eats was starting to get bigger, and helped kind of on a more regional operational role, manage the business across APAC for Uber Eats, and was spending a lot of time with the restaurants and the teams in Japan, North Asia, Australia as well, to kind of educate the restaurants on what food delivery was, because I think it was very, very new at that point. The network effects haven't, the virtuous cycle hasn't like started kicking in yet. So it's interesting to see how the companies kind of grew at that earlier stages, right? Similar to what we saw at ride sharing, where there was a lot of subsidies, both on the driver side, where you give incentives to bring on as many drivers as possible, and on the customer side to give promotions to start taking these actions. We saw the same thing in food delivery as well, where you would have to subsidize to get customers to try it and build habits. And over time, those subsidies go away, but the habits stick and the business continue to grow because, again, they solve a key customer problem of adding value and convenience to the customer as well. And then in 2018, once the Grab merger happened, I moved over to Grab Food and was kind of one of the founding members on the regional Grab Food team, and wore a few hats there again. I raised my hand to lead the regional operations team, and then I also spent a lot of time in Indonesia, where I was looking after the strategy and growth for Grab Food. So Grab Food, we started at a later point than when GoFood was there. So there was a lot of catching up for the team to do on the ground. And scale the business and kind of compete in Indonesia. So a lot of learnings there in terms of how to build a team, how to build product and technology to scale to the scale that we're at when we were fighting from behind, right? So I think there was a lot of amazing experiences there that we did that allowed us to start gaining category position over time, and eventually starting to become one of the larger food delivery players in the region as well. And then in early 2019, got the opportunity. I think this was when cloud kitchens were starting to scale globally and starting to become a buzzword. Got the opportunity to kind of found the team at Grab. So founded the Grab Kitchen business, Blitzscaled it to 57 locations, and I think counting over the last 18 months. We're in 5 countries, 12 cities, brought on over 500 merchants as well. And each of those locations can have anywhere between 10 to 12 merchants, right? So I think out of all my Blitzscaling experiences, the kitchen experiences was by far the craziest, I think, because it was one of those things where I had to kind of learn on the ground, learn from the mistakes that we're doing, listening to the customers, and really trying to find value. And I think one of the very encouraging things at Grab was the entire leadership team was very supportive, and they gave us a space and time to figure out how to actually grow this business and get it to a point where we're at, where the unit economics and everything starts making sense, right? So that's a quick kind of overview on my experience. Any questions on this before I kind of dig deeper into each of the learning points?
We have a question from Ryan. So he asks, how did you coordinate Grab Kitchen's growth, especially on the logistics side? The workload must be very crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly for us, right, I never worked with real estate or kitchen construction. I mean, I was in mechanical engineering, but I think that was the closest I got to actually building anything, right? So for us, right, I think one of the things that we did was we hired a very strong team, and this is what I kind of get into, where the team, in my view, is one of the most important things, and it's going to either make or break the business that you're trying to blitzscale, right? You can hit everything, but if you don't have the right team, you're not able to do that. So the team that we brought on was very entrepreneurial. They were all extremely analytical. The first 5 or 6 guys that we brought on, and they were able to wear a lot of different hats, right? Everything from being the analyst, going and selling to the merchants, going and talking to the landlords, and trying to get the sites, hiring to figure out how to actually build the kitchens. So I'm not going to lie, I think the first few kitchens that we had to build took a lot of time and energy, and we probably made the most mistakes in those kitchens, and which we learned very quickly, and the team was able to kind of pivot and understand from the mistakes and take those on into all the other kitchens that came out after. So if you see, the scale at which we were able to expand was very quickly, where we went from building 2 kitchens in the first like 5 or 6 months to launching about 40 kitchens in the next 6 months. So I think for that, the initial team was extremely key. We had to find specialists who could kind of come in, who were experts in finding the real estate, building the kitchens, and then also the facilities management once all the merchants are in there, right? So for that, it doesn't make sense to have generalists. It makes sense to find experienced specialists who've done that for 10 or 15 years, which is where I started spending a lot of my time on focusing on. And the thing is, you also have, as a leader, and you go through this, you have to figure out ways to make yourself repetitive. And that's one of the lessons that I've learned throughout my career, is like, how do I make myself repetitive as quickly as possible? And the way I kind of do this is, once you elevate someone else and once you mentor someone else to kind of take on your current role, there's bigger challenges for you to take on, similar to the kind of this like curve, where you invest in your bets and your businesses to kind of manage that and grow that holistically, which you get as a kind of a network effect from that as well.
Great, thank you, Sai. And I guess we'll take another one from last round of Q&A. It's a question from PSR Akulish. He asks, some asset-heavy plays, such as EV charging or cloud kitchen, are they amenable to Blitzscaling based on this canvas?
Sorry, Chinshi, can you repeat that? Sorry, you were breaking up a bit.
Oh yeah, sure. Some asset-heavy plays, such as EV charging or cloud kitchen, are they amenable to Blitzscaling based on this canvas?
Yeah, I mean, I think any asset-heavy businesses, you probably want to blitzscale from like, for example, from like 0 locations to 10 or 15 locations, or even like EV chargers from 0 to like 50, right, or something like that, before you go to 1,000 or 10,000. Because at that scale, if you haven't figured out your core unit economics and how to make margins and how to keep your overheads lower, it's too late, right? You won't be able to solve problems when you're at that scale at the same way that you are when you're smaller. So I think it's probably harder to blitzscale these business models, but you can still, instead of just being stuck at that 1 kitchen for 3 years, I think, or like one or 2 like EV locations, going to like 10 or 15 is the right middle ground, where you actually start learning things when you're at that scale before you go to the next level of hyperscale after. Great. Does that answer your question? I think you're on mute. Okay, great. Okay. Awesome. So I'll go to the next one, right? Sorry. This is the photo of the Grab Kitchen team that we took last year in Indonesia. And so I think product market fit, right? I mean, you see this in all business books. Everyone talks about it. It's how do you like actually define it? And I think what I've seen happen is when it actually hits, you know it, right? It'll be in your face that, okay, we have something that's working. For example, when we launched our fourth, I think this was our fourth kitchen in Jakarta, there like immediately started doing hundreds of orders. Drivers were waiting in massive lines in it because I think we knew that we solved a very meaningful problem for customers where they wanted to get their favorite food, specifically in Jakarta. If you had food in North Jakarta and you wanted to get to like the central part, it would take an hour and a half or 2 hours in traffic, right? So moving those restaurants to these locations were actually a lot of value. And we also had a lot of innovations where we combined all the different restaurants into a single order, so a single customer can order from multiple restaurants, which a lot of customers enjoyed as well. And when you solve that meaningful problem, right, like you start seeing it come through in terms of the love from the customers. And in a complex marketplace, right, for kitchens, it was actually a four-sided marketplace. It was merchants, customers, drivers, and then obviously from Grab in terms of kind of the real estate and managing the kitchen and stuff, right? So you have all four pieces have to work and for it to be a pure product market fit. So as your marketplaces get more complex, I think that's why it takes a longer time to find it. But when you do, you actually have a long waiting list. Even for kitchens, right now, there's a lot of restaurants that want to join, but there's just not enough openings, right? This wasn't the case in the first few months, but once people hear about it and starts making sense for them, you start seeing the love kind of come through as well. And to the previous question, right? Like I think if you're not seeing the product market fit after you get to like 10 locations or a certain scale, the recommendation is to slow down, not speed up. Because the complexity in solving business problems only exponentially increases as you get into more locations and your overheads increase. And you'll be spending more time solving the inefficiencies in a bad location or just scale of the overheads you have than actually solving core customer problems. So I think slowing down and taking the time and reevaluating is extremely important to be able to do that as well. And the last 2 points on this is, there's been very few situations where you find product market fit immediately, right? It's those things that sound nice, but it's very hard to do. At Uber, at kitchens, at food delivery and stuff, it took us a lot of experimentation to actually try out a lot of different models, ideas. So founders or the business heads need the space to kind of incubate these ideas and to build it, right? And I think I was fortunate to kind of have the leadership at both companies kind of embrace this and give you this flexibility to do this. And obviously having the access to capital also allows you to experiment and kind of make mistakes and iterate very quickly to find out what is actually the next big thing in this space as well.
Sai.
Yeah,
this is Jay.
Got
a tough question for you. So
sure.
You mentioned access to capital and being able to subsidize the consumers to be able to be on the platform, right? And the differences between global players and local players. The truth in Asia is that we have a lot of fragmented markets across the region. And what kind of advice would you give to local players that are starting out in each these fragmented markets that are trying to scale the platform business when they don't have the luxury of the access to massive capital to be able to subsidize the initial growth? So looking back, if you didn't have the backing of the excessive capital that Uber and Grab did, right? What would you have done differently to be able to have the same influence and same impact on the growth without the subsidies that you could be able to spend. Did the question make sense? It's a tough one.
Yeah, it does. No, it is. It is a tough one, right? I mean, I think if I didn't have the capital, I probably would not be in food delivery or ride sharing. But no, I think jokes aside, right? Yeah, it's one of those things, and the example for Grab actually against Uber is a good case study for this, and you can take some learnings from this as well. Is when you're fighting someone with global levels of cash, they have tech talent globally, and they're able to just come in with the product that's been essentially experimented with 3-4 more years. You have to go extremely local. And I think this is what Grab was able to do really well. Was you started going local, you started charging, customers can pay with cash, you started going into two-wheelers, right? You started getting into payments, all these things, right? So identifying areas that you can combat global players based on your unique advantage of being local, I think is very important, right? Because some of the things that global, and we saw this at Uber, right? Like it was very hard to convince the product teams or the engineering teams to build things for specific markets, right? So if they had to build specifically for Vietnam because of a certain regulation on the payment side or the wallet side, it would take months, right? Because you have to also prioritize Brazil, you have to prioritize like India and all these other countries, right? So so they're at a disadvantage from being able to localize and give you stuff that really matters, right? Or it could be something else as simple as like, hey, in Vietnam or like in Indonesia, there's a different social platform that people use a lot more than what they use in the US, for example, right? And then you try to find partnerships that give you that local edge without having to kind of fundraise or find that traction, right? So so I think partnerships are a good way to get distribution without spending a lot of money. But I think business models that are capital intensive, like food delivery and ride sharing, I think they can only get you so far with partnerships. You will have to raise a lot of money to be able to kind of create that network effects and compete. But you can outcompete global players by being very local.
Thanks. That was great.
Thanks, Jay. Any other questions, guys?
We have one question in the chat box from Suraj. He asks, how did your product development keep up with pace of expansion, and tips on how to enable that?
Yeah, so I think so for the product development, right? What was important for, like, I think both food delivery and ride sharing is the core concept of the dispatch algorithms and connecting the driver to the customer and to the restaurant and food delivery is a core dispatch problem that has to be built and can be something that you can take to each different country that you go into, right? So that gives you an advantage where you don't have to replace that. But the things that you have to kind of build in is you have to be able to localize for the product and tech needs that you need in each country. And I think this is something that at least in the earlier days, Uber wasn't able to do as quickly as some of kind of the local players were able to do. And one of the models that I actually do like is having a central tech stack or an architecture that's being running for all these core problems like dispatch, batching, or any of these other pricing algorithms that you can take as a foundation globally. And then when you go into a specific region or a specific area, you actually localize by building it purely dedicated engineering team to do that, right? And I think Delivery Hero kind of globally does that pretty well because they're able to be in a lot of different regions and still have local engineering teams for the regions that they're a part of.
Thank you.
Great. I think just a few more slides, guys. Please bear with me. And the last two slides wanted to cover, and this is something that I realized later on in my career, how important unit economics and gross margins are to running a great business. I think earlier on, I was more focused on in the situations that I was in a part of were all about scaling growth and how do you build mechanisms to get you growth. But over the last 2-3 years, I really started spending a lot of time understanding why it's so important to get profitability and positive unit economics early on. And it actually becomes a very necessary variable in your things that you're balancing and the constraints that you're looking into to make sure that it makes sense, right? And when you add profitability into the equation, which all businesses should be, right? It just depends on the sequence of events of when you do this. It makes you deprioritize specific strategies or plans that you'd want to do because it just doesn't, you don't see the path to profitability, right? So, and I think with my latest experience at Kitchens, this was something that was always top of mind in terms of how do you actually make this business profitable, or how do you get there? And the second thing is you also have to remember that it's not only about your company that needs to make money. Your customers, or in our situation with the Kitchens, the merchants also need to make decent margins and make enough money to continue using the kitchen and continue expanding, right? So when you start taking their unit economics into play, right, like with their COGS, their staffing, the food delivery commission, all that stuff into account, you need to make sure that they're making enough margin for them to stay on and expand with you as well. So when spending time with the customers to make sure that all these different pieces actually fit together and coming up with a strategy to make it work is extremely, extremely important. And it's something that is much easier to do when you're smaller, as opposed to, and you figure out your proper business model, than when you get bigger and you're trying to do this at scale, and it becomes very, very difficult. You might just collapse under trying to do it, right? And I think overheads is also something that's extremely important, right? Like everything from your manpower costs, your G&A costs, and your sales costs to get each single dollar. How does it overlay to get your margins is something that's very important. I mean, these are fundamental metrics that businesses have been looking at for decades. But for blitzscaling companies, I think they've been pushed forward a little bit later into when they become important. But I think it's one of those things that the earlier that you can look into it and make sure that it makes sense, the better you're set up to scale without having to continue raising a lot of money over time as well. And it also just, it's a good gut check, right? Like if you're spending all this time, effort, running a business, and you're making very low margins, and the risk is high, it's like, should you even do this, right? It's one of those things where you evaluate if it's the right call. And there were a few ideas within Kitchens that we just didn't do because the effort was just too much for the return that we were able to be getting. And ideally in the future, right, like you can use the cash flows that you're getting from these existing businesses, or the funding that you're able to raise from the growth or the revenue that you're getting, to invest in new bets and continuously go after those escalating S curves that I showed earlier on, to make sure that you continue getting that growth in the future as well. And I think this is something that I very strongly believe in, kind of this model, and I really embrace companies that do this holistically from the beginning, and it's part of the core culture. And both Uber and Grab do this. Amazon, again, my favorite example of this as well, is when your core business stagnates or gets to 10 or 15% year-on-year growth, you put all your profits and your capital into new bets that you think will give you higher returns as a basis of having your existing core infrastructure, right? Like having the Prime membership allows you to invest in a lot more bets. And companies that continuously do this and innovate in this are the ones that end up being there for decades and even a century. And these are the companies that continue to invest in the growth and putting these bets, right? And when you see like why Amazon had such low EBITDA margins for a long time, is because they would just put everything back into all their big bets. And it's starting to pay off now, where the company's worth close to $1.5 trillion, and it's still hitting very large growth rates at that size. And what's important is when you have to run these different business lines, one of the other key learnings was you have to hire very strong talent, like those generalists that I was talking about earlier on, they're the perfect leaders that you can groom into taking on these businesses and growing them as well. So you're able to multiply the number of businesses that you're able to run, while also keeping your strongest employees motivated and challenged with giving them more and more challenges and ways to learn, right? And so if you look at at Andy Jassy at AWS or Susan Wojcicki at YouTube, right? They've been essentially running those businesses which are both worth hundreds of billions of dollars, as opposed to leaving Amazon going somewhere else. And I think it's a testament to kind of the leadership to nurture that talent to be able to do that as well. So I think that's so at Kitchens we actually did this a lot as well. We invested in launching grocery delivery out of the kitchens. So we do everything from FMCG to groceries to desserts. We worked with a lot of brands to launch virtual brands. And we actually worked with a few other companies to kind of scale this business as well in terms of brand creation and what needed to be done there. So with that, I just wanted to quickly kind of announce, also, I think it's been on the LinkedIn last day, but I've actually left Grab about a few weeks ago to start my own business and focus on building a B2B SaaS platform for restaurants. And I think, especially with COVID kind of coming in for the last 6 months, it's been an extremely tough time for restaurateurs to adapt and evolve to kind of the changing needs that are coming out with these businesses. I think the trends have been there pretty aggressively for the last 5-10 years with food delivery coming in, cloud kitchens, but everything's been on hyperdrive in terms of the changes that you're starting to see and the impact that it's happening. And it's one of those things where I was very passionate about this industry, and I think I'll continue to be, where I wanted to support building the software that allows the mom and pop restaurants or the really high quality local restaurateurs to kind of compete against the bigger chains or the bigger restaurants over time by having the technology to do that as well. So I'm very excited. It's still very new. So we're going to be in build mode for the next 5-6 months. My co-founder and I are building in Singapore at the moment, and we are looking to hire for an engineering lead, designer, and customer success lead as well. So if you have any recommendations or if you want to just chat about this after, please reach out to me and we can discuss more. I think that's all I had, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Sai, for sharing these wonderful sessions. I think we do have some questions pipelined in chat box. So the first one is from Yash. How did you and your team ensure that customer experiences didn't take a hit while scaling up?
Yeah. So our entire team was extremely data and analytics oriented. So there were a few issues where ratings would have gone down because either the merchants weren't used to cooking in a new place, or the scale was just too big and they couldn't handle the orders that were coming in. So we built a very close feedback loop between getting the reviews and working with the merchants to fix those issues, and actually to make sure that the ratings and the experience continues to improve, right? So your data and analytics becomes your best friend in these situations when you're trying to scale and adapt to these situations. And the people that were on the team and everyone that I look to hire personally come with that foundation to be able to identify those issues and solve it.
Sure, thank you. Our next question, I will just combine a few together. So how do you manage thousands of merchants, especially in CI area, where there are many street small merchants? They don't care much for operational performance. And how do you think cloud kitchen has affect the traditional restaurants, and how do they survive, in this kind of canvas?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I continue to be impressed by is we discount the ability of all the restaurateurs to understand the macro trends and understand technology, right? So I think when there's so many different innovative mom and pop restaurants that we've seen. So there used to be this one roadside nasi goreng restaurant in Jakarta that actually expanded to 5 locations, and she's become a local chain just with kitchens, right? So I think the piece where we had to work very closely was, it wasn't that, hey, can these restaurateurs, are they ambitious or motivated enough to do this? It's more about how do we explain this in a way that is understandable and it works with their current working capital or any of their constraints with their business to be able to do this, right? So when you're able to really connect, right, really understand their core P&L. I mean, a lot of restaurants, the local mom and pops don't know what their P&L is, right? So when you go into those details and you understand what makes sense, what doesn't, you might realize that, hey, this restaurant might not be a fit because their, for example, basket size is too low and their margins will be too low. But when you get into those details, you reduce the risk of failing by ensuring that their probability of success is higher, right, with the data and what they can do there.
Great, thank you. And so there's another question. Could you point out some common mistakes companies do in Blitzscaling?
Yeah, I mean, I think companies and also what I've done in the past is, one is you think about monetization and unit economics too late, right? And that essentially kills your business that you're trying to scale. So it's one of those things you have to think about much earlier on. Number two is, not, like I said, not all models should be blitzscale. So you should identify which, if it meets those criteria of being able to be blitzscaled, or if it's not, how do you get it into a position to be blitzscaled as well? And then three, I think where I've made a lot of mistakes in the past and I've learned from is the hiring and the type of people that you bring on. For all new businesses, and again, for my startup, is I think the characteristic that I find invaluable is kind of the hunger and dedication, passion to learn and be okay with and resilient against change is extremely important, because those are the things that make you survive all the downturns that will happen, to kind of do that over time.
Great, thank you so much. And we do have some questions related to your startup. Do you mind picking them up? Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, so the first one is, how do you plan to start your business during this unprecedented time? And how do you evaluate founders' ideas and arrive at one which requires funding? Yes.
Yeah, I think because of I'm in Singapore, so been very fortunate to kind of have the COVID cases kind of go down. I know in India, Indonesia, and the US, it's not the case at all. So actually, COVID, I thought it gave me and my co-founder an opportunity to brainstorm and come up with ideas and what to do, because you can't travel. There's a lot of activities that you can't do because of COVID. So it's actually, in my view, some of the better times to think and ideate and come up with ideas and where to solve. And you're also starting to see this as being a major shift in how existing businesses are being run, right? It could be airlines, it could be travel, it could be food, e-commerce, maybe even commerce and everything, right? Like movie theaters. So I think like there's going to be a lot of new business ideas that come out of this. Airbnb and Uber both came out of the 2008 recession, right? So I think when there's a drastic impact and disaster kind of going on, I think it allows for new ideas to kind of come out and be built as well.
Great, I hope that answered your questions. So I guess we have some more on your startup as well. Why do you decide to raise a pre-seed round rather than bootstrapping, given you are a SaaS company? And how many projects do you concurrently at any particular time? And how do you kind of prioritize each project or task?
Yeah, no, great question, right? And it was one of those things that we were thinking about for a while as well. But for me, was very important, and the emphasis that I put on hiring and the team. I wanted to bring on the right team and have enough capital to bring on really, really solid talent that could build for the long term, right? And the vision for the startup is not just in Singapore. We want to be a global company. We are targeting going to Hong Kong, Australia, US as well, since it is again a SaaS company. So for us, it was very important to bring on the right talent early on, who could also bear the fruits, right? If this is successful, there's nothing like sharing the returns with the early team members as well. So we wanted to use this as a way to actually build in the right talent, build the product, and then as soon as we get a product market fit, then kind of raise the next round and Blitzscale after that, based on some of the learnings that I've gained in the past.
Great. Thank you so much. Yes, I think that's our Q&A sessions. And thank you, Sai, for these insightful sessions. And thank you, everyone.